O'clock in the morning. Inside a mansion of glass and marble on the outskirts of Chicago, a black billionaire walks downstairs to grab a book and stops cold. A pregnant cleaning woman is balancing on a stool, wiping the high shelves of his library. Her sleeve slips. His eyes catch the bruises ringing her wrist, layered old over new. Then the lamp finds her face, and his breath leaves him. He knows that scar. He knows that woman. She vanished from his life 15 years ago without a single word goodbye. And tonight, she does not recognize him at all. Ethan Cole had built a life designed to keep him from looking back. The mansion sat on 3 acres at the edge of Lake Forest, far enough from the south side of Chicago that the elevated train never reached this part of the world, and the silence at night was the kind that money paid for. He had earned every wall, every window, every quiet inch. 33 years old, the youngest black founder ever to take a logistics platform public on the NASDAQ. The kind of man whose name appeared in business magazines beside words like ruthless, focused, untouchable. The kind of man who ate alone, slept alone, and did not keep photographs. He worked late because work had been the one steady thing for 15 years. There was a glass of bourbon at his elbow and a contract he was not really reading, and somewhere around 2 in the morning he stood up to find a particular volume he half remembered seeing on the 3rd shelf of the library. He took the stairs in his stocking feet. He did not bother with the chandelier. The single lamp in the corner of the library was already on, which was unusual at this hour, and that was when he saw her. A woman in a gray cleaning uniform, 2 sizes too large, stood balanced on a small step stool, reaching to wipe the top edge of a shelf she should not have been touching at her stage of pregnancy. Her belly pressed against the wood. Her left hand braced the shelf for balance, and as she stretched, the cuff of her sleeve fell back and the lamplight caught the inside of her wrist. The bruise was not new. It was a constellation. Old yellow underneath fresh purple on top, the kind of layered violence that takes years to put on a person's skin. He crossed the room fast enough that the wood floor creaked, and her body locked. She came down off the stool with the careful, instinctive economy of someone who had learned how to make herself small in a hurry. She kept her face down. She kept her hands tucked. She apologized in a low voice for the disturbance and said she would be done shortly, and her words ran together in a way that told him she had said this same sentence in this same tone many times before to many men. Then the lamp caught her cheek. There was a thin crescent scar under her right cheekbone just below the curve of the eye socket the size of a fingernail. He had been the one who sat with her in the emergency room when she got it. She had been 11. They had been arguing over whose turn it was on the chain swing behind the public school, and she had jumped too soon and the metal seat had come back hard. He had pressed a folded t-shirt to her face and walked her 6 blocks to the clinic because no adult was around who could be relied on. He could have drawn that scar from memory in the dark. His breath left him. He had not seen Lena Brooks since the summer he turned 18. She had gotten on a city bus going one way. He had gotten on a Greyhound going the other. He had spent the first 2 years of college trying to find her, and the next 13 years trying to forget that he had failed. She was standing in his library at 2 in the morning, 8 months pregnant with bruises on her wrist, and she had not looked up at him once. He almost said her name. He stopped himself. He could see how she was holding her body, and her body was telling him things her mouth had been trained not to say. A woman who flinched from sound. A woman who would not meet a man's eyes. A woman whose ankles were swollen above shoes whose heels had been worn down on one side. Whatever it was that had brought her into his house tonight, it was not ready to be greeted by an old name. And there was something else he understood in that long, careful silence. She did not know him either. He could see the absence of recognition in her shoulders, in the way she addressed him as sir, in the pure professional fear of someone who believed she was speaking to a stranger. He was almost a foot taller than the boy she had last seen on a tar rooftop. He had grown into his frame, into his voice, into a beard he had not been able to grow at 18. He wore charcoal cashmere instead of second-hand cotton. The cleaning service had drilled the same rule into every employee: do not look at the client, do not speak to the client, finish your shift, and leave. She was obeying that rule because the only thing standing between her and the street tonight was that paycheck. And underneath all of it, he suspected was the simplest reason of all. In her mind, the boy she had once known was not a man who could ever own a house like this one. The two pictures could not occupy the same frame in her head, so her mind quietly refused to assemble them. He asked her gently if she was all right. She said, "Yes, sir." She said it the way a wall says it. He told her she could leave the rest. He told her to take whatever time she needed. He watched her gather the cloth and the spray bottle and lift the bucket with both hands because the weight of it pulled her shoulder. He watched her walk out of his library with her face still turned away, and he stood alone among the books and could not remember why he had come downstairs. Back in his office, he closed the door and called the man who handled his security. He spoke for less than a minute. He gave a name. He gave a year of birth. He gave the last city where he had any record of her, which was Gary, Indiana. He told the man he wanted everything by morning and that he wanted it without paperwork that could be traced back to him. By the time the sun came up, he had it. She had married a man named Derek Mallory the year she turned 18. The Mallorys ran a pawn shop on the east side of Gary that had been a front for short-term loans at the kind of interest rates the state did not allow on paper. Derek's father, Walter, had died of a heart attack 2 years ago. The marriage had produced 3 police reports for domestic disturbance, all of them withdrawn within 48 hours of being filed. Lena had walked away from the address listed on her driver's license 24 days ago. There had been no missing persons report because the only person who would have filed one was the man she had run from. She was working for a small Chicago outfit called Maple Cleaning Company, a graveyard shift operation that paid in cash, asked for no identification, and rotated its workers through houses without telling them whose houses they were. Ethan read it twice. He set the tablet down. He sat at his desk in the gray light off the lake, and he let himself think about the rooftop for the first time in a long time. They had been 12 and 13 the summer she taught him to read better than the school had managed to. She would climb the fire escape behind her father's apartment with a library book under her arm, and he would meet her on the flat tar roof, and she would read out loud while the train rattled past below them. He could hear her voice in his head right now, clearer than anything in the report. "There is just one kind of folks. Folks." She had read him that line and looked over at him as if to ask whether he believed it. He had loved the way she said it, as if she did. She had told him that summer that she was going to have a real library someday, a big one, with ladders. He was going to come read in it with her. The library 3 floors above his head right now had ladders. She had been the woman wiping its shelves at 2 in the morning for cash because she could not use her real name on a payroll form. He understood sitting at that desk that he was looking at the simplest decision of his life and the hardest one. He could fix this from a distance. He could call the cleaning service and triple her wages and have her gently moved off any account that involved physical labor. He could put a lawyer on her case anonymously. He could be generous and absent. He could be the kind of help that never has to look the person it is helping in the eye. 15 years of building a life behind glass, and the glass was right there ready to be kept up. Or he could open a door. He waited until the next night. He sat in the wing chair near the library entrance and read the same page of the same book until he heard the cartwheels on the marble. When Lena came in, he did not stand. He did not want her to feel cornered. He spoke low, and he spoke first. He told her he knew she was in something difficult. He told her he was not going to ask her about it. He told her that there was a guest house on the property that nobody used with a separate entrance and a lock that worked from the inside, and that she was welcome to stay there until the baby came, and after the baby came as long as she wanted, and that she could leave any time she chose with no debt of any kind to him. She did not look at him. She said very carefully that she could not accept that. She said her supervisor would lose his contract. She said she did not take charity. He told her the supervisor would lose nothing. He told her this was not charity, and he did not have a clean word for what it was, but it was not that. And he told her one more thing because he wanted her to have it in her pocket when she walked out. He told her the gate code was 1207 and she could come back through it any time, day or night alone, and no one would stop her or ask her anything. The numbers landed before her face did. December 7th, her birthday. She held very still for the length of one breath. Then she picked up her cart and rolled it past him without speaking, and the front door closed behind her, and he sat in the chair and listened to the silence of his enormous house. At 4 in the morning, the gate intercom rang. He went down barefoot through the dark hallway and pressed the button without checking the camera because he already knew. The gate opened. A small figure walked up the long drive in the cold, carrying a plastic grocery bag that held everything she owned. He met her at the door. He did not touch her. He stepped aside and she stepped in, and that was how she came home without knowing yet that it was home. Have you ever wondered what the hardest part is when you meet someone you once loved in a moment neither of you saw coming? It is not finding the right thing to say. It is knowing when to say nothing. Ethan saw the bruises on her wrist and the avoidance in her eyes, and he understood that what she needed tonight was not the return of an old friend. She needed a safe place to breathe before she could even begin to remember who she had once been. There is a kind of grown-up love that does not rush to be claimed. It is patient enough to let the other person find their way back to themselves first, and only then if they choose back to you. There is a lesson life only teaches when you meet someone again in worse condition than you ever imagined for them. Recognizing a face is easy. Recognizing that the person has been changed by what you were not there to see and choosing not to turn away from that change is what the rest of us have learned to call grown. The first 4 days, she barely came out of the guest house. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Lindgren, who had worked for Ethan since the year he closed his Series B, took meals to the door 3 times a day and brought most of them back untouched. Lena would crack the door, accept a tray with a thank you so soft it might have been a breath, and close it again. She did not ask for anything. She did not refuse anything. On the second day, Mrs. Lindgren reported with the careful neutrality of a woman who had seen many things in many houses that the guest had asked her not to bother the boss, that she would be leaving as soon as she could, and that she did not want to be a burden. Ethan listened, thanked her, and did not go knock on the door. On the morning of the 5th day, he went into the kitchen and made chicken and rice soup. He had not made it before. He had eaten it many times. There had been a woman named Miss Eloise on his block growing up, the kind of older lady who kept a screen door propped open and a pot on the back burner, and when one of the neighborhood kids came down with a fever, Miss Eloise's chicken and rice soup arrived in a Pyrex bowl wrapped in a kitchen towel. No questions, no payment. He could remember sitting on the edge of Lena's narrow bed when she was 14, with that exact bowl in his hands, spooning broth between her chapped lips, because her father was passed out on the couch and there was nobody else. His soup that morning was not as good as Miss Eloise's. He used too much water. The rice broke apart. The ginger he sliced was uneven because he had never sliced ginger in his life. He poured it into a thick ceramic bowl anyway and carried it across the lawn to the guest house and set it down outside the door on the small wrought iron table. Beside it, he laid a folded piece of stationery. He wrote 3 sentences. I half remember a neighbor on our old block making this for a friend of mine when she was sick. I never knew her recipe. This is my best guess. He did not sign it. He knocked once and walked back across the lawn without looking behind him. It was almost an hour before the door opened. Lena stood with the tray in her hands and stared at the note for a long time before she carried it inside. She set the bowl on the small table by the window. She read the note again. Miss Eloise. Nobody had said Miss Eloise's name in her ear in 15 years. She sat down with her hands flat against the table edge and did not move for a long while, and when she finally lifted the spoon, her hand was steady because she had learned how to make her hands steady through worse things than this. She ate the whole bowl. Tears ran into it without her noticing. The soup was not as good as the soup she remembered. It was better because of who had made it, and because she did not yet have the courage to know that she knew. She did not come out and thank him. She washed the bowl by hand in the small sink and set it on a towel to dry, and the next morning Mrs. Lindgren found it on the wrought iron table with a folded piece of paper underneath. Thank you. L. He read it twice and set it in the top drawer of his desk. The next week she began to walk in the house. She moved slowly, the way late pregnancy makes a woman move, and she kept to rooms where she would not encounter anyone. The library in the mornings was empty. The light there came in low and gold through the east windows, and it fell across the lower shelves first. On a Tuesday around 11, she found herself running her fingers along the spines on the second shelf from the floor, the children's novel Height. She was not looking for anything. She had not let herself look for anything in a long time. Her hand stopped on a paperback whose cover had been mended with clear tape years ago, the spines sun-faded, the corners furred soft by handling. To Kill a Mockingbird. She slid it out. The library card pocket inside the back cover bore a faded red stamp. Southside Public Library, 2005. On the inside front cover, in careful pencil that had been pressed too hard by a 13-year-old hand, someone had written EC borrowed from LB will return. She sat down on the floor of the library. Her back went against the shelf, her belly rested against her thighs, and she held the book in her lap with her hands flat over the cover, the way you hold something whose weight you suddenly do not want to set down again. She did not cry the way women in stories cry. She cried the way women cry who have been holding it for years, quietly, without shape. That was how he found her when he came in at 11:30 for a different book entirely. He stopped at the doorway. He took it in. He did not call her name. He walked across the room and sat down on the floor beside her at a careful distance and arm's length, the way two children had once sat on a tar rooftop, and he waited. She spoke first. She said without lifting her head that he had never returned the book. Ethan told her he had not returned it because he had been waiting to hand it back to her in person. She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else, and she did not look at him yet, but she said his name. She said Ethan Lowe, like a word she had been saving for a long time and had almost forgotten how to use, and he closed his eyes for a moment because hearing her say it after 15 years was not what he had expected it to feel like. It felt like the room had finally exhaled. They sat there with the book between them until the gold light moved off the floor. That night she told him. She told him in the kitchen with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she did not drink. She told him about the summer her mother died and the year after when her father had stopped going to work and started keeping his bottle on the bedside table, and how the bills had stacked on top of the microwave because there was no system for opening them anymore. She told him about Walter Mallory, who held the paper on her father's debt, and about the night Walter had come to the house and sat at the kitchen table with his hat on his knee, and made his offer in a voice so reasonable it was almost worse than if he had been cruel. $18,000 erased. Her father's surgery paid for. All in exchange for one signature on one marriage license. His son was 19. A good boy, Walter said. A boy who needed a steady hand. Lena was 17. She said her father had cried at that table without lifting his head, and she had understood in that moment that the decision was not his, it was hers. He could die or she could marry. There was no third door. There was Ethan, of course. Ethan had just gotten the call. Stanford, full scholarship. The first kid out of their building ever to make it that far west. She told him that night that the worst thing in the world she could have imagined doing was telling him the truth because she knew exactly what he would do. He would have stayed. He would have taken a job and paid the debt himself in installments that would have eaten 10 years of his life. He would have given up the only ladder out that he was ever going to be offered, and she would have been the reason. She could not be the reason. So on the night before he flew to California, she met him on the rooftop, and she did not tell him about Walter Mallory, or her father's surgery, or the marriage license. She told him to go. She told him not to come back to that neighborhood. She let him think she was angry. She let him carry that anger across the country with him, because anger travels lighter than guilt. Before he left, she slipped a folded piece of paper into the outside pocket of his backpack. "I'll be okay. Don't look for me. L." She married Derek a week later. Her father had the surgery. He lived another 14 months, mostly in a hospital bed in the front room of a small house Walter Mallory had paid the rent on, and on the morning after his funeral, Derek hit her for the first time in the kitchen over a glass that had broken in the sink. As if he had been waiting for the last person in the world who loved her to be gone. When she finished, the kitchen was completely still. Ethan got up. He walked into the hallway. He stood with his hand against the wall for a long moment, and then he hit the wall once hard with the side of his fist. The drywall cracked. His knuckles split. He came back into the kitchen and sat down across from her again, and he said very quietly that he had looked for her for 2 years. Through every channel a college kid with no money had access to. He said it not as an accusation, but as a fact she had earned the right to hear. She came around the table. She put her face into the crook of his neck. He held her, and it was the first time their bodies had touched in 15 years, and neither of them spoke until the sky started to go gray. I have watched many women in my own family and outside of it choose to sacrifice in silence. They tell no one. They give no one the chance to share the weight. They believe this is what love asks of them. Lena, at 17, made exactly that kind of choice. She decided on Ethan's behalf that his Stanford was worth more than his right to know the truth and choose for himself. It was a decision born of love, and it was also a decision born of pride, because love does not actually grant us the authority to take away the other person's chance to stay. 15 years later, she was grown enough to understand that. And admitting that a choice you made out of love also wronged the person you loved is in its own quiet way harder than making the choice in the first place. The days after that night were softer. She let him bring her tea in the afternoons. She read in the library while he worked at the long table by the window, and sometimes whole hours passed without either of them speaking, and the silence between them was no longer the silence of strangers. On a Thursday afternoon, she was sitting in the deep chair by the south window with a book open on what was left of her lap, and she drew in a small, sharp breath. He looked up. She did not say anything. She lifted one hand and motioned him over with her fingers the way she might have called him across the rooftop years ago, and when he reached her, she took his wrist and laid the flat of his palm against the side of her belly. The baby kicked under his hand. Once. Then again harder. He did not have a word for what went through him. He had built things. He had taken a company public. He had moved millions of dollars across continents with 3 sentences. He had not until that afternoon ever felt a heartbeat that was not his own under his palm. The rain had started outside without either of them noticing. It came down soft against the south window, and neither of them moved for a long time. In Gary that same afternoon, a man named Derek Mallory was driving in slow circles around the parking lot of a gas station off the interstate smoking a cigarette. He had already forgotten was lit. He had not slept properly in close to 3 weeks. The seat of his gray Ford Bronco was littered with receipts and empty energy drinks and a folded piece of motel stationery on which he had been writing things in a hand that got smaller and tighter the further down the page it traveled. His phone propped on the dashboard was open to a photograph he had not been able to close in days. Lena in a white dress on the steps of the courthouse, 18 years old. Him beside her in a borrowed jacket, grinning the kind of grin a young man grins when he has not yet figured out how to ruin a thing, his hand on her waist, as if he were afraid she might float away. Ethan had hired a private investigator the week Lena had told him her story. The investigator had driven down to Gary and sat for 2 hours with a woman named Mrs. Halloran, who had lived next door to Lena and Derek for the entirety of their marriage. Mrs. Halloran had said something the investigator had typed up almost word for word and sent to Ethan in a 1-page report. He wasn't always like that. The first year I used to see him walking home from the pawn shop with little things for her. Once it was a stuffed rabbit, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore, and he stood out on the porch with it for almost an hour before he came inside like he was scared she'd say no. Then his daddy died. Then he started drinking. Then he changed. I think he was scared, mister. I think he was scared she'd leave him the way his mama left his daddy. So he held on too tight, and he kept holding tighter, and that's how those things go. Ethan had read it sitting in his office at 4 in the morning. He had not felt sympathy. He had felt something more useful than sympathy, which was clarity. Derek Mallory was not an abstraction. He was a man who had once stood on a porch with a stuffed rabbit and was now driving in circles in a parking lot in Gary with a photograph of his wife on his dashboard and no plan beyond getting her back. Men like that do not stop because the law tells them to stop. They stop because something inside them finally breaks, or because someone stops them. The Bronco had been logged at intervals along the road to the estate for 3 nights, running first at half a mile, then at a quarter mile, then closer. The security team had flagged it. Ethan had read the flag and made one call to a man on his personal staff, and then he had gone upstairs and watched Lena sleep for a long minute through the half-open door of the guest house before he closed it again. The storm came in on a Friday. It came up the lake fast, the kind of November front the local stations had been warning about for 2 days, but which still managed to surprise everyone when it actually hit. Lightning cracked over the water in long white seams. The wind took down a transformer at the substation a mile inland, and the power on the whole northern stretch of the lake road went out at 13 minutes past 9 in the evening. The estate's backup generator took the house, but the perimeter cameras dropped to local only, and the front gate switched to manual. The road into the property low at the bottom of the long drive began to fill with water by 10. Lena was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of warm milk Mrs. Lindgren had pressed into her hands before going home for the night. Ethan was across from her. The lights flickered once steadied on the generator, and the wind took something metallic somewhere outside and rolled it across the gravel. Lena set the cup down. She looked at him. She said his name, and the tone of it was different from any of the times she had said it before. He was already moving when she put a hand to the side of her belly, and her face went still in the way a body goes still when it is listening to itself. The first contraction was a real one. She was 3 weeks early. He called for an ambulance. The dispatcher's voice, when it finally came through over the storm, told him they would do what they could, but the lake road was already underwater in 2 places, and the closest unit was working a multi-car pileup on the interstate. 90 minutes was the best estimate. Maybe more. He called Dr. Reynolds, the obstetrician his security director had put on retainer the day Lena had moved into the guest house. She picked up on the second ring. He told her where they were. He told her what the dispatcher had said. He told her what was happening in his kitchen. Dr. Reynolds was quiet for 1 full second. Then she told him in a very level voice that she could not get there either. The roads were closed at her end, too. She told him she would stay on the line. She told him to put the phone on speaker, find clean towels, find scissors in the medical kit she had stocked in the upstairs bathroom 3 weeks ago against exactly this kind of night, and to do exactly what she said when she said it. While she spoke, headlights came on at the foot of the long drive slow through the rain, and a gray Ford Bronco began to push its way up through the standing water. There comes a moment in every life when the hardest thing is not giving love away but daring to receive it. Receiving requires you to admit that you have been hungry, that you have been hurt, that you were not enough on your own. The moment a wounded person allows another person to come close enough to touch them, even if the touch is only a hand resting against the curve of a belly on a rainy afternoon, is a kind of courage that has no name in the dictionaries we are given, and it deserves one. Ethan moved her into the master bedroom because the master bedroom had the heaviest door in the house and a deadbolt that had been installed the same week the security team had flagged the gray Bronco. He laid her down on the side of the bed nearest the wall. He propped 2 pillows behind her shoulders. He set the satellite phone on the nightstand on speaker, and Dr. Reynolds' voice came through it steady and warm and unafraid, telling Lena her name, telling Lena she was going to walk her through this, telling Lena to breathe with the count. He went to the bathroom and came back with the medical kit. Towels fresh from the linen closet, 4 of them stacked. A bottle of distilled water. A pair of surgical scissors still in their sterile pouch. A rubber bulb. Gauze. The doctor had stocked all of it 3 weeks ago and walked Mrs. Lindgren through the inventory and walked Ethan through it twice. He had thought both times that he was being humored. He understood now that he had not been humored at all. The contractions were coming closer. Lena gripped the edge of the mattress when the next one took her, and she made a low sound through her teeth that was not a scream yet, but was on the road to one. He sat on the bed beside her and put his hand against the side of her face and told her she was all right. She told him between breaths that she was scared. She told him between the next 2 breaths that if she did not make it through this, he should not let the baby grow up thinking nobody had wanted her. Ethan told her in a voice he kept very level because he was not going to let it be anything else that she was going to make it through this. He told her that he was here. He told her that he was not going anywhere ever again. She said his name once more. Just once. Ethan. It was the second time she had said it since she had remembered who he was, and there was something in the way she said it that he understood as a hand reaching for his across 15 years of dark water. He took it. That was when the sound came from downstairs. 3 sharp knocks against the kitchen-side French doors hard enough to rattle the brass. Then a pause that was not really a pause the way a held breath is not really a stillness. And then the unmistakable wet crack of glass giving way under something heavier than a fist. Lena's whole body went rigid. Her hand closed around his sleeve. She did not have to tell him who it was. He pressed the small black button mounted under the lip of the nightstand. The button did 3 things at once. It dialed the local sheriff's substation through a hardened line that did not depend on cell towers. It triggered an alert at the private security office that monitored the estate. It locked every interior door in the house that was wired to the system, including the master bedroom door behind him. He put the satellite phone into Lena's hand and folded her fingers around it. He told her that Dr. Reynolds was right there, that she should listen to the doctor, that whatever the doctor said to do, she should do. She caught the cuff of his shirt. She told him not to go. He looked at her. He told her he had to. He told her he would come back. He went down the stairs in his socks because he was faster in his socks. He went down without turning on the hall light because he knew the house and the man at the bottom of the stairs did not. The lightning was doing most of the work for him anyway, throwing the foyer into white relief every few seconds and then taking it away. In one of those white flashes, he saw Derek Mallory standing in the middle of the living room. Derek was soaked through. Water ran off his jacket and pooled black on the rug at his boots. There was a length of iron in his hand, the kind of short pry bar a man might keep in the bed of a truck for fixing things, and the end of it was wet. He had not brought a gun. He had not come here to kill anyone. Ethan understood that the same way he understood weather. The man in his living room had come for one thing only. He had come to take his wife back to a house in Gary, Indiana, and the iron in his hand was the only argument he had ever needed for any of his other arguments. The 2 men looked at each other across about 15 feet of dark hardwood. Derek spoke first. He said she was upstairs. It was not a question. Ethan answered him from the 3rd step from the bottom. He told Derek in the calm, low voice that had once closed a $1.8 billion acquisition over a phone line that she was upstairs and that she was not going anywhere. Derek said something that started as an explanation and finished as nothing, his sentence falling apart. The way sentences fall apart when a man has not slept in 3 weeks. He said Ethan did not understand. He said Ethan did not know what he had been through. Ethan came down the last 3 steps. He did not raise his voice. He told Derek that he did know. He told Derek about the porch with the stuffed rabbit. He told Derek about the year Walter died. He told Derek that he understood more than Derek expected anyone to understand, that the man standing in the living room had been afraid for a long time of being left the way his mother had left his father, and that he had decided somewhere along the way that the cure for that fear was to make sure his wife could not leave even if she wanted to. Derek's jaw worked. The iron bar lowered an inch in his hand. Whatever he had been preparing himself to walk into in this house, it had not been a stranger who knew the inside of his own life. Ethan kept his voice exactly where it was. He told Derek that none of that gave him the right. He told Derek that he had hit a woman who was carrying his child. He told Derek that he was not taking another step in this house. Derek lunged. Ethan brought up his left forearm and took the bar across the bone of it. The pain was immediate and white-edged, but the bone held. He drove forward off his back foot the way he had been taught at 14 by a boxing coach at a community gym, shoulder first, and he put Derek into the side of the leather couch and then down onto the floor between the couch and the coffee table. The iron bar skittered across the wood and stopped against the baseboard. He did not hit Derek. He pinned him. He put one knee across Derek's chest at the diaphragm and one hand flat against Derek's collarbone and the other hand around Derek's wrist, and he held him there. Derek was strong and Derek was angry, but Derek was also a man who had not eaten properly in 3 weeks, and Ethan was a man who had built his body the way he had built everything else, which is to say, with a quiet and unromantic discipline. He held him. A floor above them, in the locked bedroom, a woman's voice rose in a long sound that was no longer trying to be controlled, and a few seconds after that came a different sound entirely. Both men on the floor heard it at the same time, the thin, particular cry of a newborn. Derek stopped struggling. He did not stop because Ethan had won. He stopped because something inside his chest had heard something it had not been prepared to hear. He looked up at the ceiling somewhere in the direction of that small new sound, and his face did a thing faces do when a man is looking at the wreckage of his life and finally seeing it from the outside. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sirens were coming up the long drive by then, slow against the standing water, blue and red painting the front windows in pulses. Ethan held him until the deputies came through the broken French doors with their flashlights in their offhands and their voices calling clear, clear, clear. He stood up. He stepped back. He let them have the man on the floor. Derek did not resist. He let himself be turned and cuffed and walked out into the rain without looking at anyone, and he did not look at the ceiling again either, although Ethan watched him not look, which was its own kind of thing to witness. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Lena had brought her daughter into the world by herself. Dr. Reynolds had walked her through it on the satellite phone in the 4 minutes Ethan had been downstairs. Lena had listened. Lena had pushed when she was told to push and breathed when she was told to breathe, and at the end of it she had reached down with her own 2 hands and lifted a small, wet body up onto her own chest because there had been nobody else in the room to do it. The cord was still attached. The doctor's voice was still in her ear, telling her exactly where to clamp and exactly where to cut and exactly how to wrap the baby against her own skin so that the warmth of her body would do the work of every incubator that was not in the room. When Ethan opened this bedroom door, that was what he saw. A woman propped against pillows with a small, dark-haired baby, crying against her bare chest under a folded white towel, both of them alive, neither of them needing him to have been there for it. He came across the room and he knelt by the side of the bed, and he did not touch either of them. He looked at Lena. He asked her with his eyes more than his voice if he could. She lifted the bundle a few inches off her chest and held it out to him. He took the baby into his hands. The baby was the size of a loaf of bread and weighed almost nothing and was the heaviest thing he had ever held. The baby looked at him with the unfocused new eyes of a person who had been on this side of the world for less than 10 minutes, and he looked back at her, and he understood that he had spent his whole life building a house in case a moment like this one ever decided to come find him. The most important moment in this story is not the moment Ethan held a man down on the floor of his living room. The most important moment is the one happening upstairs at the same time the one in which Lena, alone in a locked room, brought her own daughter into the world with her own hands. For 14 years her body had belonged to a man who was not her. On the night of the storm, she took it back. She took it back with her hands shaking and her voice raw, and a child she had carried out of one life and into another. There are kinds of freedom that do not need a witness. And there are women who do not need to be rescued. They need a place safe enough that they can stand up on their own, and the rest they will do themselves. The legal part came later and quickly, and it did not matter the way the rest had mattered. Derek was charged with felony breaking and entering assault with a deadly weapon for the iron bar, and a long line of older offenses that the Gary Police Department had been keeping in a folder for 14 years because nobody had ever given them the standing to use it. The 3 withdrawn domestic reports came back to the surface. Mrs. Halloran from next door drove up to Chicago in her own car to give a deposition. A judge in Cook County signed an order of protection that would outlive most marriages. Derek went to the kind of facility that has high fences and long sentences, and the cycle of violence that had begun in a kitchen in Gary the morning after a funeral closed quietly behind him. 3 months passed. Spring came up the lake the way spring comes up the lake, slow and gray and then suddenly green. The cracked drywall in the upstairs hallway had been patched and painted. The French doors had been replaced. The Bronco had been towed off and crushed for parts. Mrs. Lindgren had moved a small white bassinet into the corner of the master bedroom, then into the corner of the kitchen, then into the corner of the library, depending on where the baby seemed to want to be that day. The baby's name was Hope. Lena had chosen it without ceremony, the way a woman chooses the name of a thing she is no longer afraid to say out loud. On a Tuesday morning in early March, Ethan stood at the kitchen island and made oatmeal. He had gotten better at cooking, although not by a lot. Lena sat at the counter on a high stool with Hope asleep in a sling against her chest, drinking coffee that was mostly milk because she was still nursing. He set a bowl in front of her. She tasted it. She told him deadpan that he had used too much salt. He told her he was learning. She told him he had been telling her that for 3 months. He told her she was welcome to teach him. She lifted her cup and took a sip and looked at him over the rim with the small, wry expression of a woman who has been somebody's friend longer than she has been anything else, and the look held the whole rooftop in it and the bus station and the 15 years between and the night of the storm and this kitchen all at once. They had not spoken about marriage. They had not spoken about the future in any of the architectural ways people speak about the future. They were living one day at a time inside a house that had been built for one man and had quietly, without any of them noticing, exactly when become a house for 3 people. There was no rush. 15 years of distance does not collapse into a wedding inside 90 days. It collapses into a kitchen, into a bowl of oatmeal, into a baby's even breath against a mother's chest, into a man across the counter who has stopped trying to be anywhere else. On the 3rd shelf of the library, in the spot where she had once found it, the taped paperback of To Kill a Mockingbird sat at eye level. Beside it on the shelf, Lena had placed a new pink notebook with a blank cover, untouched, waiting. There are people who leave us not because they have stopped loving us, but because they believe silence is the last form of love they have left to give. If one day they come back, do not begin by asking why they left. Begin by asking what they need today.